Hi, and welcome to this talk on making our Python code more accessible. First, an introduction. My name is Dmitriy Chukhin, and I'm a developer. I've been working as a web developer for the past 9 years, building web applications primarily in Python and Django, but also working in other frameworks and languages. One of the things that I've enjoyed the most about my time as a senior developer and our team lead has been mentoring other developers, helping them to grow, asking questions, answering questions, and figuring things out together. And one of the things that we've been figuring out together recently has been the idea of accessibility and how to make our web applications more accessible to more people. Accessibility is important, both ideologically as well as helping the business. And so I'm going to talk about how to make Python code more accessible.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle Bouchard. I have a background in design, customer service, and user experience, or UX. And after many years of dabbling in some code configuration and really loving it, about 2 years ago, I completed a full stack software development boot camp. A fun fact is that when I got my first development job after I graduated from boot camp, Dmitry was my mentor, and honestly still is to this day. We've talked about this a lot, and accessibility is something that we're both very passionate about. For me, from my perspective, I believe that accessibility is a fundamental aspect of UX. I don't think that there's any question about that because ease of use and user experience, really go hand in hand with how someone is accessing your information and your tool. Um, it became more and more clear to me on my tech journey that accessibility is fundamental to all aspects of any business. And I've done a lot of self-study with some great resources that I've had. And more importantly, I have made friends with some incredible people in this community, in this industry, who are much more knowledgeable than me on how to make things more accessible. But I'm a huge believer in the concept that you have to start somewhere. And the only way for us all to be better is for all of us to share the knowledge and experiences that we have. So, before we really get into it, let's go over some high level definition type things to get everybody on the same page. So we've said the word accessibility several times, but what does that actually mean? The definition is the quality of being easily reached, entered, or used by people who have a disability. There are some synonyms and similar concepts, including ease of access, ease of use, availability, comprehensibility, understandability, those kinds of things, regardless of ability. So then the next logical question is, what is disability? And that's any condition of the body or mind, an impairment that makes it more difficult for the person with that condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them, which is a lot of words. But these things can be categorized into 4 different types. There's behavioral and emotional, sensory impaired disorders, physical disorders and disabilities, and developmental disabilities. Now, disabilities can be permanent, temporary, situational. They can be visible or invisible. They can be known or unknown. So, for example, on a personal note, I was diagnosed with ADHD very late in life. I had no idea growing up that I had it. Some idea. But the point is that I didn't realize what that meant. I didn't realize that I had a disability necessarily. And so when I encountered things that were difficult for me to comprehend, I felt like there was something wrong with me. But in reality, it's that things were not accessible based on how I processed information. And that's really important to remember. And honestly, everyone, everywhere can move into or out of a state of disabledness at any moment. And that's why creating things with accessibility in mind from the beginning is so important. And in reality, when you create something for people who have a disability, it's going to benefit everyone else too. There's some really concrete examples of this that we see in everyday use. For example, the most well-known one is the curb cut effect. That's the area in the curb that's a little bit lower down. You probably use it when you are grocery shopping, or if you have a dolly and you're pushing something heavy, Or, if you're in a wheelchair, then that was made specifically for people with a disability that required a wheelchair. But I mean, if you've got a stroller, it's going to be helpful for you too. So that is just one great example of how things that were created for people with disabilities in an accessible way really benefit everybody.
There are a lot of accessibility concepts, but the most important ones that we've come across from our time working on web applications are the following. Number one, accessibility is an important concept for each person on the development team, whether that person is a designer, the front-end developer, the back-end developer, the quality assurance person, project manager, or anyone else on the team. Oftentimes, it's easy to think that accessibility is something that just the designer or the front-end developer should focus on, but actually everyone on the team is a part of making accessible features and contributes to making an application more accessible. Number two, it's important to have accessibility as a regular part of the development process and not just something to add at the end. Speaking from experience, if it's something that we leave until the end, it probably won't get done. And actually, it's a lot easier to make accessibility a part of the feature if we think about it as we're working on it rather than trying to make the feature accessible after we've done everything else. For a lot more concrete examples, you can view the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which have a lot of examples about concrete details like images and color contrast and many more examples. Front-end code in JavaScript and HTML ends up being used by end users, so it's more obvious what sorts of accessibility implications it has, but Python code typically isn't. Nonetheless, accessibility still applies to Python code that people write, whether it ends up being explicitly seen by end users or not. And it's still an important concept. I'm going to mention three things on this slide. The first one is having an accessibility mindset and thinking of accessibility as something that's important in the things that you write, whether you're adding a feature to a project or fixing a bug. In some way, your code will be used by another person. And so it's important to make your code accessible to that person, whether that's an end user or whether it's another developer. Number two is thinking about the user visible changes in your code. If you're working in web development, that may mean something like making error messages readable or accessible, or thinking of the data that's returned from an API, or even thinking about the amount of data that is returned. Number three is making your code accessible for other developers. In a way, other developers that read your code are users. They may not be the end users of the application, but they are people who will be working in your code. And so it's important to make your code accessible for them. Here are a few examples of how we made our Python code more accessible. First, we've written comments and docstrings into our methods and functions to make sure that when somebody's reading that method or function, they can quickly see at the top what this method does or what this function does. And we've added comments to each section of logic to make sure that that piece of logic can be explained. If there's something that's confusing, then it can be explained in the comments. Another thing is giving variables meaningful names, so not using variables like A, B, and C, but using variable names that have meaning to what is relevant in that logic. Another thing is we've added linter settings to make sure that we can capture anything that may make the code less readable. So that includes things like the length of a line, but you can also customize your linter settings to catch many more things. We use pre-commit so that whenever anyone is adding a commit to a repository, we run a bunch of linter settings, and if there's something that the linter decides is not acceptable, then the person has to fix that, whether it's making lines shorter or any of the other things. Another important one is choosing your code editor. There are many code editors out there, and they have varying levels of accessibility compliance. A popular one is VS Code, and one that we use on our team. And VS Code has a long article about the way that they have tried to implement accessibility into VS Code, from things like syntax highlighting and using different colors with an appropriate color contrast, to showing a hierarchical view of the code base and of a particular file, and many other things. And I recommend that you read that article as well as whatever settings your particular code editor might have. And if you find that there are issues, certainly feel free to point them out to them, and I hope that they will improve the accessibility of their code editor, whatever code editor you're using. Another thing is thinking of the specific end user examples, such as having readable error messages. When we write Python code, it's actually the Python backend that's returning error messages to the front end. So if the Python code has messages that are not readable by people, then that is actually an accessibility issue that can be fixed in Python. Another thing is supporting non-Western data, such as names that are very long or have characters that are not in the ASCII set, or supporting names that don't have a first name and a last name, or many other scenarios which people around the world may run into, but people don't typically run into in the US. And so we've tried to think about those things in the way that in a way that a user might be affected by them, whether that user lives in the US or not, and to make sure that the backend supports making sure that the backend supports an accessible front end, whether a person has characters in their name that are ASCII supported or not, as well as many other examples. Another thing that's listed here is an accessibility checker, and there are a number of accessibility checkers available out there. One of the things that we've tried to do is also to write some unit tests in Python that do some basic checks of accessibility on web pages, things like color contrast and checking the HTML tags and checking alt text for images. And so that is something that you can include within your automated unit tests in a repository. There are many other examples, but these are just a few that we have added. And if you have other examples that you have added or that you're interested in, certainly feel free to reach out to us, and I would be happy to hear your examples and try to improve the code that I write through them as well.
Thank you so much to all of you for watching our presentation. We really appreciate it. Love the support for the accessibility community at large. And we want to give a very special shout out to our friends, Louis Lee, Sage Putnam, and Ronald Luna. They were pivotal in helping us put this together, and are incredible support and great developers who are also fighting the good fight. So thank you guys all for joining us. Thank y'all all for joining us. And hopefully, if you have any questions or feedback, please let us know. Thank you.